What is the impact of generative AI on industry innovation? And what have we at Microsoft learned over the past 18 months? And for today in particular, what does it mean for startups and organizations across the world? Today, we have a special episode in our series, Microsoft Startup AI School, with our product and industry leaders across financial services, healthcare, and manufacturing. I'm Raj Singh, based in Singapore, leading the regional strategic ISV partnerships for Microsoft ASEAN. Without further ado, let's welcome our panel. First up, we have Namrata Jolly, Financial Services and Insurance Industry Lead for Microsoft Asia.
Hi.
Next up, we have Dr. Karen Priyadarshini, Healthcare Industry Lead for Microsoft Asia.
Hi.
Next, we have Saj Kumar, Manufacturing Industry Lead for Microsoft ASEAN. Last but certainly not the least, Rohan Khan, Azure Sales Enablement and Operation Lead for Microsoft Asia.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Thank you so much, Rohan. Great to have all of you on the panel. Before we get started, though, please take note of the code of conduct for today's session. We have posted it in the chat window. All we ask of you is to be respectful and let's have a good time together. With that being said, let's get the first question rolling. When we talk, and this one is for Rohan. So when we talk about AI strategy and innovation, we know that it's a boardroom discussion, very similar to when during the pandemic, everyone went remote and hybrid work was a conversation that was happening in the CEO boardroom. And us at Microsoft wanted to help our customers and partners across the world in building a hybrid work strategy. AI is very similar. So how are customers working with Microsoft, Rohan, to bring this boardroom AI strategy to its end users?
Thanks, Raj. This is certainly top of mind for basically all of our customers in every industry, no matter how small or large, right? And so really, when we work with customers, what we do is we start from their business strategy, right? What we do is we sit down with customers and we ask them very clearly to define for us, what are they hoping to achieve? AI is a powerful tool and technology that is going to be highly disruptive for every industry, but it's still a tool, right? It's not an end in itself. It's really only useful employed in the service or support of a customer's fundamental business strategy, as well as their own competitive differentiation. So the starting point is always going to be is the customer trying to achieve in their industry vis-a-vis their customers, as well as versus their competitors. And then what Microsoft does is we introduce lots of different options and choices for them to think about how to best start and how to make the most out of their AI investment. What you see in the slide here is an analogy, but a good one, which is, do you buy or build, right? And for many, many customers, just like if you're thinking about buying a house, you start not from, hey, I'm going to build a custom built house from scratch. You probably are going to start with something like, hey, I'm going to buy a pre-constructed house, right? Or buy it from somebody else. The buy option is our copilots, right? We have now just about a copilot AI assistant for virtually every single Microsoft first-party service or product. Our productivity and collaboration tools like Microsoft 365, our business applications, right, for CRM and salespeople, our sales copilot, our security copilot for CISOs and folks working in security, our GitHub copilot, right, for developers, Power BI copilot, Azure has a copilot, right, the product and platform that I'm accountable for. Virtually every one of our first-party services and products has a copilot that you can use basically out the gate, right, almost immediately, and it requires relatively very low technical intensity or ability. So folks can use it right away and employees can benefit from it from the very beginning. However, the level of customization, of course, isn't that extensive when you buy a SaaS product, right, like Copilot out of the box. So for folks that want a greater level of customization, right, they may have some different use cases that they want to leverage. For example, lots of customers have many, many internal applications, right?
Yeah.
Their own HR system, their own financial services system, their own ERP. They often say to us, hey, I would love to have an intelligent co-pilot, an intelligent AI assistant for that. Well, we've created something called Copilot Studio, which is arguably like a low code or no code way to assemble quickly your own Copilot, right? That has some level of customization and the ability to create copilots for customers' own internal applications. Then, as customers get more experienced and get more and more value out of their AI applications, they begin to think, I really want to go deeper in this, right? I want to decide for myself which models I'm using, which large language models I'm going to use. I want to tune those models myself. I want to train those models myself. That level of customization is like building your own custom house from scratch, right? And just like building your own custom house, it's probably going to take longer and be more expensive. But obviously, you can design the blueprint and the architecture and every room of the house exactly the way you want it, right? So that's what developers, professional developers in ISVs, in startups, in digital natives, in enterprise customers, they're leveraging our Azure AI Studio to build that kind of custom work. Okay, so that's typically, you do have customers that jump straight to the most advanced level and they say, hey, I want to develop and build my own custom work and AI applications right out the gate. But there is typically an adoption cycle where most people start from the easiest part, right? The thing that they can try right away. Like the conversation I often have with customers is, how many developers do you have in-house, right? And if you are a startup, that's probably like 90% of your workforce is engineers, right? Well, would you like to double the productivity of all of those engineers and developers like virtually overnight? And people say, how can I do that? Well, GitHub Copilot writes on average 40 to 50% of code for developers. So an application that might have taken a development team a month to build from scratch, they can probably finish in about 2 weeks, right? So that's literally doubling the productivity. Most customers are at least willing to give it a shot, right? Before they go and do something deeper. If you flip to the next slide, Raj, it goes deeper into the explanation for the differences, like when and where you would want to choose between Copilot Studio, which remember is sort of assembling your own house from pre-built modules, right? Versus Azure AI Studio, which is fully custom, right, in terms of development. Now, for a lot of the folks on the line, right, you're probably developing a lot of your own applications. You probably have a lot of professional developers and engineers working on your startup or your ISV. Well, probably you're going to opt more to build more custom work, right? Because the tooling is a lot more powerful there, and it'll allow you to build really much more innovative and creative solutions for your customers or for your own company to leverage, right, with your customers. So if you sort of think through kind of the stages, right, of AI adoption from the boardroom to reality, most customers will start very simply with improving the productivity of every employee, right? That's always helpful, and it's very easy to get started, especially with one of the Microsoft first-party copilots that you can use right out of the box. And then they slowly progress into, how can I improve or increase the optimization of the way we already do business, right? Optimize my supply chain, optimize the way we build and develop new solutions and software and mobile and cloud applications. Finally, when you get to the sort of most advanced stages, when they really are thinking about creating completely innovative new products or solutions that didn't exist before, or even innovative business models that didn't exist before. And that's what Azure AI Studio is for at that level of development. Okay, so it's really, if you think about it, to go back to the initial analogy, when you start with AI, I often counsel or coach my customers to think, hey, do you want to go and build a custom house right away, or are you going to buy a house and try it out first, right? And then as you learn more about the house, you think, I would build the bathroom a little bit differently. And then you have choices depending on your needs for how technical you want to be and how fast you want to get time to value and how much customization you want to build. So that's a great way to think about buying or building your AI house. Okay, Raj, back to you.
First of all, I must say, First of all, I must say, Ron, the house analogy is just spot on, right? And I want us to take a moment and appreciate the beauty of this entire comprehensive solution, right? I think we are so proud of this that at the end of the day, Microsoft has the most comprehensive AI offering for our customers. What I really loved that you spoke about, Ron, was the part about how time to value is key, how you want to go for the low hanging fruit, but also be cognizant of how your company is set up. Are you a developer run organization? What's your size? What do you want to do with it? But I want to bring the rest of our panel in on this, right? When we see this happening across industries, and anyone feel free to jump in, uh, those low hanging fruit use cases could be horizontal in nature, HR, procurement, finance, and so on, or it could be industry specific in nature. So, what are you seeing in terms of which are those use cases that customers are going for first when they think about the buy, assemble, develop model? Dr. Karen, would you like to share? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries. Absolutely. So, love what Rohan shared. And taking that same structure of buy and build in healthcare as well, I think healthcare has benefited the most when it came to OpenAI, GenAI, and Copilot. So, this model applies on the industry side as well. So, if you look at the build, right? That's more on the innovation side. But when you're looking at buy, in healthcare, we typically have three major parts. One, of course, is the hospitals, and then you have pharmaceutical companies, and then, of course, you have med tech companies as well, right? So today, I'd love to dwell a little bit more on the hospital side and the buy versus build. So when you look at buy in a hospital, you have inpatients and outpatients. Now, outpatients are typically seen by a GP, right? You fall sick, you go to the nearest GP, nearest to your house, and that's where it begins. The whole buy part, where what is the GP? How does the GP use Copilot or OpenAI? Some of the very low-hanging fruit that we have seen is around discharge summary reports, referral letters. Like we're based in Singapore, so the GP typically writes out a referral letter saying, "Oh, please go to XYZ hospital." And normally it's system generated. It needs your medical information input into that. Then the GP's remark, and it takes some time. And typically outside a GP clinic, you see patients waiting. You go to a polyclinic in Singapore, you literally will be there about 4 to 5 hours, right? So how do you kind of quicken this process with a simple buy? And that's why we're looking at auto-generated referral letters, being able to summarize the medical data that the clinician, the GP, is seeing on his or her screen. And then, of course, we are looking at understanding that data. I'm not sure about you, Raj, and the other panelists, but sometimes when you go to hospitals or to GPs, they're looking at the screen and they're looking at only, let's say, a few screens that they scroll by, right? For our parents and our family members who are chronically sick, you go like multiple times a year. How do you make sense of all that data? And normally, doctors would look at, let's say, the last 2 to 3 screens and say, "Oh, I know what's happening, and what's the problem with you now?" But with Copilot, what you can do is you can summarize all that. The last, let's say, 2 years, 3 years visits, you can summarize. And for people who don't like data, who don't like to see numbers, you can see it graphically. For me, that's amazing because I love to see those curves going down and, you feeling better. The disease is better controlled. And this is at the clinic side. And clinic side, you typically want like high throughput of patients, high volume of patients. Now, when the patient becomes chronically sick and you go to the hospital where you have the specialist, right? And that's where we're looking at inpatient. Now, the experience has been is that when you enter the hospital, it's fast because you're sick. But when you get well and you want to go back home, I have seen it takes about 3 to 4 hours. You need your doctor to sign off. You need to sign off on the medication. Then the nurse has to sign off. And the discharge summary report, I understand, takes about 7 days, 5 to 7 days. So after the patient goes home, the report comes by, and now it's uploaded on an app. It takes about 5 to 7 days because you've got to get, if the person has had multiple comorbidities or had an operation, you have data points across multiple systems that have to come together. In one of the largest leading hospitals in India, they shared with us that the data has to be pulled in from 7 different systems to bring that together and create that discharge summary report. You have lab report, you have usables, consumables, you have the ward, and if this person, God forbid, had to go to the ICU, you have the ICU data. So imagine getting all that data together and then making sense of it. So that's where super useful is using Copilot. You can build a discharge summary report. The second very interesting use that I find is in the medical records itself. Now, medical records, as I was sharing earlier, run into years and years. As people age and live longer, you're going to have like, right, and in Singapore, right from when you're born in the hospital and you're vaccinated, your medical records start till you die. And the average expectancy of life is 82 years. And there, how do you make sense of data, let's say the last 5 years or 10 years of someone's life? And this is where I think the Copilot becomes very useful. How do you summarize that? How are you able to draw insights from that? I mean, very interesting. I wanted to share one piece of information that the average expectancy of an individual is about 82 years in Singapore. But when this person hits, he or she hits 55 years, and especially 75 onwards, the quality of life deteriorates so much. How do you get that information? This is when you use Copilot to draw insights from that data that the doctor is looking at. And imagine if a hospital were to have this data, they know that when the individual hits 75 years, quality of life is going to deteriorate. So can I start like 20 years earlier to kind of manage that disease better using this data that you're seeing from your medical records? So that's another very interesting use case that we see in hospitals. Last but not the least, skilling. You know, we all in Microsoft learn, and that's the growth mindset. So doctors as well look at all these medical journals and they want to kind of summarize all that information more for publishing or even for looking at the best treatment. You know, I've been in healthcare now almost like 18 to 20 years. And the interesting part is that sales reps used to play that role, right? They would go with the latest publication or this thing from the pharmaceutical company and go to the doctor. But now using Copilot, you can actually customize. Each doctor can see what information or what kind of journals or what area they're interested in. If you look at cardiology, you can go really deep inside and say, hey, I want to look at acute heart failure, chronic acute heart failure, and give me all the publications and summarize all of that. And I've seen doctors just love it because they're able to get everything in a very neat summary form, quick to digest. And, you know, I was very amazed to see that in the day they go to their clinics, and at night I've had calls like at 10 p.m. and I see doctors still wearing their hospital uniform, and I'm like, haven't you gone home? They say no. Now is research time. So they're burning the midnight oil and trying to make sense of all that publication. As Rohan shared, it makes it much more productive and faster. And finally, the beneficiaries are us, right? And the last one I wanted to share was what Rohan shared around build. Now, that's where I think the magic also lies. You know, this is all the first few things that I shared is around productivity and so on. But when you begin to innovate and when you begin to build, that's when the magic sets in. And we've had some very interesting interactions with hospitals. And I just love it because they would say things like, hey, can you build for us a digital CFO? And I'm like, what? Yeah, they said we want to see where we can cut costs. Where are the areas where costs are spiraling? You know, the joke was a fever is a fever. And probably 10 years ago, I paid, let's say, $5. Now I pay $110 for that same fever. So hospitals would love to kind of, you know, manage costs. They want to kind of reduce costs so that the patient doesn't have to pay more. And especially in markets where it's publicly funded, then it's going to come out of the, you know, government's pocket, and they don't want to kind of make that as a burden. So that was a very interesting one. These are what I call as build, where you are innovating and you're creating new use cases. The last one I wanted to share was, if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of these use cases. The last one is around, you know, once COVID left, virtual health was like almost reduced. But what the doctors did, and you know, doctors are one of the most smartest species on planet Earth. They can multitask, they can do so many different things. What they did was they turned this whole virtual health into a lot of other virtual agents. And this is where Copilot became very useful. So you're looking at like virtual nursing, you're looking at virtual clinics where it could be care from home. And this is where Copilot really helps, because you're able to create what we would call as virtual assistants, where the assistant is able to look at data, say, hey, this is now in a very severe condition and this patient needs to be rushed to the hospital. So those are what I would call as the build segment, where you're looking at virtual support. It could be in the terms of a clinic, it could be in the term of a virtual nurse that you're looking at, it could be a digital CFO for that matter. And one of the things that is very interesting is that, cancer is the most dreaded disease on planet Earth. And when somebody, God forbid, has cancer, a whole suite of physicians need to come together. So you need to have your anesthetist, you need to have your cancer specialist, you need to have a few other specialists, cardiac, if the person has a cardiac problem. And what we call it as a tumor board, right? It's like a board, literally like a corporate board. You have a tumor board where all of them come together. And this is where it becomes very interesting, because Copilot is able to kind of show all of them insights based on what they want to see. A cardiologist wants to look at the cardiac data, an oncologist wants to look at the oncology data, and they all want to discuss together. And this tumor board management makes it so much more interesting, because you're able to draw insights and have a much better level of care than, just imagine if each doctor were to like run through all this data physically, manually, and then try and kind of share that with somebody. This has now become totally enabled because of the build part in Copilot that we have. And so these are some of the, I would say, the very innovative use cases that are, taking healthcare to the next level.
And there's so much
Over to you, Raj.
There's so much richness to take away from that, Dr. Karen. Like, I think in terms of understanding the different personas within healthcare, now, whether that be patients, doctors, whether that be oncologists, surgeons, how do we improve their experience with patient being at the center of it, right? And
Absolutely.
one thing I always say this, right? Like, one thing I'm really proud about working at Microsoft is, give us a problem, we'll find a solution, because our technology stack is so vast, especially with the first party technology products we have, the third party SIs and channels and resellers, and the ISV ecosystem. We'll find the solution for you. Let's find the problem which will impact your business the best. And we'll change gears for a bit. And interestingly, we've met around 50 startups in the past 5 months. It's been really interesting. And one thing they tell me the most is, Raj, how do we get into the financial services sector? They have their headquarters in Singapore, and they're like, how do we expand across ASEAN? So that's my perfect cue to bring in Namrata. So Namrata, I was talking about the low-hanging fruit use cases, and how can startups and ISPs look at this opportunity, right? In terms of going into the financial services sectors, and what are we really seeing as those common use cases emerging from that?
Yeah, Raj, I'll just take a little macro view, and then we can deep dive into the micro and what those use cases are. I think this is across the board, but financial services very much today is impacted by there's a lot of demand and supply shocks. There's a lot of inflationary policy. There's a lot of geopolitical instability. We have 60 countries going to the polls today, right? This year. There's a lot of climate risk. Cybersecurity risk is a huge risk which financial services faces today. And that's, as we know, also one of the most regulated industries around the world, where regulation is constantly changing and becoming tighter. So what the CEOs of, whether it's banks, insurance companies, capital markets, firms are telling us, and their C-suite, is clearly they are in a state where margins are shrinking, right? And there is the huge need for them to be able to do more with less, right? And that's where we're talking about the ability to take out cost across the value chain, in terms of how they engage with customers, but also in terms of the different functions as they are performed within a financial services organization. And we know that everyone is at it in terms of rethinking the customer experience, but how do you then go out there and really differentiate yourself, right? And the same is true for being able to improve the experience of your staff internally. and being able to help them move away potentially from mundane tasks and be able to focus more on the high value adding activities. So now, with that backdrop in mind, right, I'd like to focus on some of the use cases and where we are seeing huge adoption. So you can go on to the next slide. It'll just help everyone get a view of where we are seeing the most adoption. So first of all, I'd say the whole contact center or services center bit, where there has been a huge opportunity to provide for optimization in terms of the ability for contact center staff, whether it's a bank, whether it's an insurance company, someone walking into a branch, or having a chat with someone through their mobile app or the web banking portal, ensuring that there is the ability to provide information, I think in a customized way, while some of the responses are quite standardized, but being able to provide for a differentiated experience in that interaction. And as against a lot of the experiences today, which are about you get finally connected to a customer service operator because of the fact that you didn't get the response you needed, and then that takes 1 or 2 days. But bringing that cycle time, one is too much lower, and the second thing is really being able to optimize on the kind of effort that's required within the organization by leveraging technology, and of course this is something which our Copilot stack always also provides for. The second area I would say is distribution. So whether it is feet on street, the agents in insurance, the relationship managers and bankers in banks, being able to really empower this frontline, which is engaging with customers at scale, helping them with providing for the right pitches, helping them prepare for a customer conversation. If customer had a complaint, how at any point in time this particular person, as the representative of the bank or the insurance company in that conversation, is aware of where that complaint is at, where a particular purchase of, let's say, an insurance policy or a banking product is at. And depending on the life stage of the person, it could be a person who's just started his or her career, right? And the life aspirations at that stage are different versus someone who's a sandwich generation like me, who has elderly parents and also has young kids, and therefore the aspirations are different. So being able to provide for the right product set at that point in time, in having that conversation which would be relevant to the customer, I think that's the other area which is very, very important. And also, of course, helping the sales folks then being able to record and be able to make a summary of the conversation and thereafter follow up. So there's a lot of the productivity element, but it's also really empowering to provide for a differentiated customer experience. And I think the third area that I would highlight on is really about the whole fraud prevention bit. So fraud prevention, super, super critical in today's world, especially where a large interaction is across digital channels. So whether a customer is getting phished, or whether it's social engineering, or there's just some sort of a scam where, let's say, the multi-factor authentication failed or was bypassed and so on. So really being able to empower and strengthen these organizations, because they have a very large fiduciary responsibility to their customers. So ensuring that part is in place. And last but not the least, I'd say, is product development itself. So financial product development, which is differentiated for different segments, whether it's high net worth, affluent, mass segments, or the micro segments within that. Again, this is very much persona based, but at the same time, Copilot providing for capabilities and AI providing for capabilities where it's possible to understand the market much more minutely, also to be able to understand the kind of propositions that are there, and therefore the gaps that need to be filled in terms of product proposition. So I'd say, in a nutshell, these are some of the big areas where we are seeing traction. And very much the objectives from the customers that we serve is opportunities to be able to bring up revenue generation and to optimize cost, while upskilling and reskilling their customer base. And I'd give one example of a global bank before handing it over to you back, Raj. With the whole empowering of distribution, which is RMs and advisors, we've had one global bank which has gone public just recently, and has the CEO has spoken specifically of per RM, per banker, seeing a time save and a productivity save of almost 15 hours per week, which is not a small number by any scale. So with that, handing it over back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Namrata. And again, like this is where this space is one of the most interesting ones, one of the most difficult ones to get into as well. When I talk to startups, I always tell them that you need to understand the country you're operating in. You understand the regulations that are going on. Why should they choose you as a product or a software or a solution over someone else? And there's so much richness. I was just taking notes, and I was like, which are the top things I really want to highlight, right? So we talked about fraud detection and fiduciary responsibility that banks have. And that's an area of innovation that we're seeing coming up a lot. And that's not a cookie cutter approach, right? You really want to understand the country you're operating in for your end customer. Do you have feet on the ground to help them understand the challenge that exists out there? The other big thing that I captured was the cost across the value chain. Now, this is an old saying in B2B software business that either your product increases the revenue for the customer, lowers the cost, or it's a compliance function. Could be sustainability or could be security. You just can't live without it. So you need to figure out which category you fit in, because at the end of the day, your customers are thinking about it from that angle. So your value proposition when you talk to financial services has to be across these three brackets. Last but not the least is persona-based innovation is even more relevant in financial services, because depending on the bank you're talking to, whether you're talking to a commercial banking division, the retail banking division, within that, they want to figure out the individual customer segmentations that you talked about, right? Like ultra high net worth individuals. How do you look at institutional investors? There's so much to do in this space. And I know, Namrata, if we were to cover financial services in detail, we probably need 2 hours to sit down together and explain that. Sorry, Namrata, you wanted to add in?
Yeah, I know we are going to hear from Saj as well, but just very quickly, just the huge sheer scale of unstructured data which sits in financial services. It's huge, it's rich, but it's not necessarily being used. And this is where the opportunity to leverage AI is just immense, because it can operate across both structured and unstructured data. Of course, data still needs to be tagged, still needs to be clean data, but you don't necessarily have to go through a whole rigmarole of making everything structured. And I think that is a huge opportunity that exists for financial services as well. I hold my peace.
That's such a great point, Namrata. and I think hopefully we get a follow-up session just on FSI as well, and we make that happen for our audience. And shifting gears into manufacturing, when people think about Asia and ASEAN, people think about manufacturing. It's the manufacturing hub of the globe. That's been the image that's existed for the longest time. And Saj has always told me during the multiple chats we've had over the years that there's so many different parts to manufacturing, Raj. Like you need to consider to talk about what are those common use cases and areas of innovation we are seeing in the manufacturing sector across ASEAN. Over to you, Saj.
Saj, I think you're on mute.
Hey, thanks, Raj, for the opportunity. And while we talk about manufacturing, most people don't realize that manufacturing contributes between 20 and 50% GDP in most economies in Asia. And more importantly, it also employs a very significant amount of the labor force in that country. And some of these are very, very high paying jobs as well. So the key thing for Asia in manufacturing is to drive productivity. So extending on what Rohan said, driving the office productivity that you see with Copilot in office apps, can we extend the same level of productivity in the factory shop floor? or in the maintenance department, or in the field service department, or in R&D. And this is where, when we look at the first use case that we typically see, is the amount of documentation that exists in the shop floor. So whether it's standard operating procedures, hazardous operating procedures, maintenance manuals, etc. It is now so easy to take the Copilot Studio that we have, take a document or multiple documents, put them in, and within 5 minutes, you now have basically a chatbot factory worker in answering any critical, because the document could be in English or in German, and the person on the shop floor is in Malaysia, Indonesia, Bahasa Melayu, Bahasa Indonesia, and then they can ask questions in any language to get that answered. The second part of where we're driving productivity in the shop floor is people don't realize that there is a lot of programming that happens in factory environments, programming of PLCs, programming of robots, programming of NC machines. And these are very unique skills that are kind of in one person in the factory for a long period of time. And remember, these machines in a factory typically last 30, 40, 50 years, right? So you may have a PLC that was programmed maybe in the 1980s, and you have somebody who's trying to maintain that code. And then you have a new employee that he wants to learn how to change that PLC to do different things. And this is where I think programming productivity in the shop floor, particularly with GitHub Copilot for some of these unique, whether it's a Siemens PLC or Mitsubishi PLC or a Rockwell PLC or a Kawasaki robot. These are areas where I think you're going to see huge productivity. The second part of where I think we're driving, going to the next generation where you see higher value, and this is where data becomes important. And I think Namrata talked about data and financial services. Similarly, in manufacturing, we have a huge amount of data on the shop floor, whether it's MES data, maintenance data, whether it's quality data, whether it's supplier data, customer data. How do you get all of these into one single data lake? And that's where I think the power of Azure Fabric, as it brings together data from multiple sources, and then that drives the large language model on top of the data for you to ask intelligent questions, for you to get intelligent answers. So what happened to my factory yesterday? Simple report in Power BI. But anybody could ask a question in any language, from the CEO down to the factory manager, factory worker. But beyond that, why was my machine operating at 80% efficiency? Why was my machine in the other factory operating at 90% while you at 80%, right? So this is where you get into a lot more of root cause analysis and then trying to get answers to these questions. I think that's the second part of what we're trying to do in terms of moving up the value chain from a generative AI perspective, getting all of this data from multiple sources to be able to answer questions. The third is where we're seeing a lot of partners, particularly partners like Siemens, Sight Machine, building these large language models that are unique to maybe design in R&D, or they could be unique to manufacturing, they could be unique to supply chain, to service. These large language models, then you can start asking much more difficult questions of a paper mill, for instance, or of a automotive manufacturing line, or of a cement line. I think this is where we're going to start seeing industrial large language models or industrial co-pilots becoming very critical, and that makes it a very narrow problem for a cement plant or a paper plant or a petrochemical facility or an automotive line. I think this is where I think it gets far more interesting and also drives higher value in manufacturing. Over to Raj.
Thank you for that, Saj. Thank you for that, Saj. I think again, you can see the variety of use cases across different types of manufacturing subsectors of sorts, right? I remember when you and I were having a discussion about this, that industrial machinery, they have these proprietary programming technologies, right? And there are huge books and manuals that people have to go through just to set them up. And with the GitHub Copilot integration, how we can use Microsoft Copilot to bring that to life, that takes that learning curve out of it, right? So I think that skilling aspect within manufacturing can be brought to life so much easier. The other part you talked about is data. I think data, whether that be FSI, healthcare, or manufacturing, that's key here, right? And the interpretation of data using generative AI, has never been that easier than ever before. Getting insights from it, in particular, has never been easier than before. With that being said, there's an interesting topic that we want to bring into the conversation. Something that we always hear from the business heads and the CEO boardroom about how do you measure ROI on AI innovation. We talk about this different studies that Microsoft has done in this space. We did a study which says that for every dollar that's spent on AI innovation, organizations are realizing a $3.5 per $1 in 14 months. I know these are early numbers, but our customers are seeing results. So I want to bring in Rohan into this conversation to talk about how customers are measuring ROI on their AI innovation POCs and projects. Rohan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. This, of course, is the single most important question, right? Whether you're the founder of a startup or the CEO of a large enterprise, they're always going to ask themselves, what's the return on investment that I'm getting out of this new technology, out of this technology investment? I think this harkens back to a few things, right? I think it goes back to what we started out talking about, the whole session about, which is your AI investment aligned to your fundamental business strategy and your competitive strategy, right? That's the critical thing. And I think that it really depends on the way a company or different industries look at their business and what value they're driving out of it. I think Namrata did a great job explaining for FSI customers and FSI, whether you're in banking or investments, right? Between the productivity gain, like saving 15 hours for very expensive bankers is quite a bit, right? That's a lot. You can measure that productivity quite clearly. And then the flip side of that, of course, many of our FSI customers are looking at how can I leverage, whether it's generative AI or deep learning or machine learning, to make better predictions, to make better, smarter investments, right? I mean, that's literally, you can measure the return on that very quickly for them, right? If they build a model that's making better investments, a few percentage points means a huge amount of money to large FSI customers. I would say that another group of customers that we're seeing significant return on investment from that wasn't captured in, I think, both Dr. Karen in healthcare and then, right, Namrata in FSI, and then Saj in manufacturing did a brilliant job talking about those industries. But a huge early adopting group is what we consider at Microsoft, what we call kind of the digital natives, right? Whether that's a e-commerce company or a startup in that's building B2B SaaS applications, or a gaming company, right? These are some of the fastest adopters of AI. Why? Because when everything you build is digital, right? It's a similar story to the one that I just gave for FSI. First, you can look at the productivity of your developers very easily, right? That's quite clear, actually. And so that's why we see so much rapid adoption of GitHub Copilot amongst the startup community, ISVs, digital natives. The other flip side of this is some of the biggest, what I'll consider e-commerce / there's a new emerging category of what we'll call social selling, right? It's players with like short video players or social media players that are leveraging social influencers to sell tons and tons of products and services, right? And so for them, generative AI is a huge new productivity boost to their top line, right? Because for them, it's very interesting. They are literally leveraging Azure OpenAI and our AI services to create much better content, right? For them, the game is all about, can I create the content that can, one, attract attention, keep users engaged, highly engaged, and attract them to take an action, right? And they can literally measure this. Like, they know right away whether or not, hey, I'm getting a lift from this new content or not, right? And so when you think about kind of the latest in terms of Azure OpenAI with GPT-4o, right, the latest model that we've built in conjunction with our good partners, OpenAI, 4.0 is what we call multimodal, right? So it works across different forms of media. And so that's very important for any of these e-commerce / social selling type players. And so I would say that for these types of customers, the return on investment is actually quite direct, right? It's very clear. That's why they're such heavy adopters of our Azure OpenAI services from the very beginning, and some of the largest users on customers on the planet for us, right? So I would say that in different industries, it's going to be the alignment with your business strategy is critical. So take Saj in manufacturing. For manufacturers, a lot of this is probably going to be, hey, can I drive efficiencies in my supply chain, my distribution, right? Can I use and leverage AI technology to become even smarter and more resilient when it comes to my supply chain, right? That's the kind of thing that will drive a much better return on investment for them. So I think that's why at Microsoft, when we work with customers, we always begin by asking them, what is the business problem you're trying to solve? How is this related to your fundamental strategy? How will it help you stand out and be different in your industry? Because that's what matters to a customer, right, in the end.
This is brilliant, Rohan. And when you talk about the business problems that the business is trying to solve for, and how do you find your narrative in finding the right metric as an ISV or a digital startup today is very important. I can't believe we're almost about to hit the end of the sessions very soon. I have one last question that I do want to get in from everyone on the panel today. So when we talk about industry innovation, there are a lot of ISVs and B2B startups on the line today who are trying to figure out what is that next area of industry innovation that we should get into, or any sort of innovation. So I bring our industry leaders in first, and Rohan, at the end, we bring you in to talk about the overall piece on innovation. So Dr. Karen, when it comes to the healthcare industry, what would be your advice to the ISVs and digital startups on the line?
Okay, this is just my favorite question. And the reason I say that is because healthcare in Microsoft and worldwide is heavily dependent upon partners, ISVs, and all the innovative partners that we have. And trust me when I say that this is the golden moment, because we had AI and we struggled quite a bit with it in convincing them. Now we have Gen AI, Copilot, and people are just building amazing, custom, innovative solutions, right? So the way I see it is, and I'm part of the Microsoft Startup Program, so I get to talk to these people. The one golden rule is, do not build anything that is already built. Because we do see a lot of also ran, I built a telehealth platform, then there's another telehealth. So in the country, you will see there are 4 or 5 telehealth platforms. I mean, that is a no. That's number one. Number two, if you really want to know, which is the next cutting edge thing that I need to build on as a partner, do a simple thing. Just go to a hospital, spend a day fully going to every department. You will see there are so many areas where things are needing help, and you can even build a simple program to help make sense of all that data, right? So it's just to go there and see how you can help and what kind of solutions you can give, because healthcare is like a laggard in the sense we've just woken up to what is called usage of data and transformation, right? So there's lots of opportunity. The third, the last but not the least, is the day we were born, healthcare started. Maybe Namrata finance started later after that, but therefore, there are lots of legacy systems. You just have to go to an operating theater. You will see they need some 7, 8 systems running over there. So whatever you build it in a way that's easily connectable, easily interoperable with the existing systems in the hospital. They're not going to throw it away. Doctors are creatures of habit. They've used it. Unless you really can show that something is far superior, they're going to use that. So don't build something that's really very difficult to connect with what is already there in the hospital. So these are, I would say, the 3 golden rules that any kind of startup can follow to build something very innovative in healthcare.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Karen. And I'm going to pass the floor to Namrata on that point. I know finance comes in later, but Namrata, what would be your advice given breadth across FSI?
Yes, I relinquished that to Karen in healthcare. But But yes, from a financial services perspective, and actually this is just very much back to fundamentals all the time. It's back to fundamentals, to what Ron also mentioned. And I do not in any way, kind of doubt the wisdom and intelligence that startup founders bring, because they go through a lot of rigor. So in the audience where there are startup founders, like, I tip my hat to all of you. um, at the same time, what I would add is it's always going back to problem statement, having an understanding of, so financial services has gone through digital transformation, is going through digital transformation, and now we have the wave of AI. So if it's a product where you're using artificial intelligence, I would first of all say, uh, it's got to be a problem that needs solving, and not a product that's just being built for the heck of it, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is, you have to have a very good explanation of why you are using artificial intelligence, right? As against just any other technology, and why that would bring value. Yeah, while we do understand the benefits of it, but this is something that I think ISVs and startup founders definitely should have clarity on, because I think the CTOs and CIOs go through this in quite a lot of detail. The third thing I would say is, just given financial services, having the ability to explain, um, you know, how your AI is responsible, how it does not, how it ensures that there is no bias, as an institution that is responsible to its customers from a fiduciary perspective, which is the whole area of responsible AI, and how your product and solution is auditable, whether by internal audit teams or whether by regulators, right? And there is the ability to explain why decisions were made the way they were. Why are you offering a certain product to a customer segment versus another one? So I think some of these things are very, very critical and are very top of mind, whether you start with a boardroom conversation or whether you're speaking with the C-suite or functional heads. I think everyone has this pretty much top of mind, just um, given how extensively this particular sector gets regulated and scrutinized. So I would say, keep it simple and clear. What is the problem statement you're looking to solve? What is the proposition you bring to the table that doesn't exist otherwise, right? And how you are ensuring that the bank or insurance company is able to be transparent with the regulator on how the use of this product is helping them do their fiduciary responsibility.
Thank you so much for that, Namita. And there's so much in there again. Like, is it a problem worth solving for? Are you clear about the problem you're solving for? And startup founders, we work a lot with startups as well. We are all passionate by nature. So how do you balance that passion with the reality of the market is super duper important. And last but not least, a responsible AI bit. Like, especially when you have a fiduciary responsibility in a highly regulated industry, do you understand the nuances of it? Does your product capture it? Does your solution capture it? Super great stuff in there, Namrata. With that, I move the same question to Saj. So, Saj, in the interest of time, I'm going to pass it straight to you.
I'll be brief. I think the first thing I would say is what not to do. Don't try to build applications around productivity, because that's easily done by companies and a lot of partners that we have in the SI space. What you should look at are in two buckets. Number one is, you're already an ISV who has a platform for collecting data from plants, manufacturing data, for instance. Try to build an AI platform on top of the data where you can add value, where you can do things like root cause analysis, fault analysis, which is much more easier than you having to do that with classic deep reinforcement learning. The second problem I think is that we're trying to solve is more narrow in nature. I'll give you an example of welding in a factory, which is pretty common. You have a lot of welders, you have a senior welder, a certain welder, and usually whenever a welder does a weld job on a piece of equipment, you need a senior welder to come and inspect, and then he normally puts sort of remarks in chalk as to what is good, what is not good, and then he has to fix it. Now, a lot of this can be now automated using GPT-4 or Vision, where you can actually take all these images and then train what the problems are. This is just one problem, but there are many, many instances of vision AI in the factory where you don't need to go with the classic AI of labeling and creating a large library of images. Today, with GPT-4o vision, you can actually do that much faster. I think this is where you're going to open up avenues for a lot of partners to come in to solve these narrow problems, whether it's vision problems, whether it's acoustic problems, acoustic signals, specific equipment problems, or specific industry problems. I think this is where industrial large language models will become more and more prevalent as we.
Thank you so much for that, Sarge. Again, all of these deserve individual sessions, and I can't stress that enough. And Rohan, over to you to bring us home on how, and I know you're a go-to-market expert at Microsoft. You lead the Azure go-to-market for the Asia region. What would be your word of advice as they're looking at that, finding that next innovation scenario and bringing that to market?
I think my three industry leaders have done an amazing job describing what they should pay attention to. I'll just add, you should work with a great partner like Microsoft. In all seriousness, I do, other than my selling to the startups on the call, but it is helpful, right? You should look for a great partner that's supportive, that's going to give you the right technical support, the right kind of coaching when it comes to your business model and introducing your customers. And you want a platform player that you can build on, right? Because where Microsoft is, I think that our heritage is, if you look, we've been in existence almost 50 years, and we've always had a great partner ecosystem. We've grown up together with our partners, right? Every like, if you look at the revenue we make globally, more than 90% of it still goes through partners, right? So Microsoft is a company completely dependent on and building with our ecosystem. And so you really want a partner like that, right? A partner that isn't going to compete with you, that provides the platform that you can thrive on, where we provide world-class cloud, AI, security technology that's always compliant, that is globally standardized, right? SOC 2 compliant, GDPR compliant. Whereas the startup, gets to focus on the solutions, the industry customers, the key business problems that no one else is solving, right? And that's the beauty of the ecosystem model that I think Microsoft has always built. That's open and very much open source at this point, right? We're the largest open source contributor in the world, and everything on Azure runs open source. So that's another appeal to the startups online. So we hope to work together with you and to support you in your success.
Thank you so much for that, Rohan. Words of wisdom as we sign off. And I can't thank you all enough. Thank you so much, Namrata, Dr. Karen, Saj, and Rohan, for taking this time out, sharing your guidance and your expertise with our vibrant startup and ISV community. So with that, we say farewell to our panel members for today.
Thank you.
So to our viewers and listeners, if you found this helpful, please take the time to hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell icon for the notifications from Microsoft Reactor. If you're interested to learn more about how Microsoft can help your startup or bring your product to B2B customers, check out ak.ms/ASEAN Founders Hub or ak.ms/ASEAN ISV Success. We've also included a survey for today's session. If you have the time to fill it out, that would be greatly appreciated. You can do so on our Reactor YouTube channel or straight after today's live stream. The survey is really important for us because it lets us know how we're doing and whether we should continue doing more of these sessions. Check out the next episode of Bytes and Builders with Okrus on June the 2nd, 2024, next week. That concludes our session. Thank you so much, everyone.